13 Somalian clans fighting each other like they were national enemies, looting, scorching, skirmishing their own and each other's homes, fighting de facto war with the UN, and all this after they had a unified country for decades, speaking the same language, sharing the same faith, defending their country against the same enemy. I will not just reveal the 4 main reasons why Somalia imploded into atoms in the 1990s, but I will also tell you what helped the country to come back to life. The 1988 breakaway of Somaliland divided Somalia forever. The breakaway hit the ruling elite in the guts, but their response was so vicious, the wound will hardly ever heal. Somalia gained independence from Britain and Italy in 1960, and the British Somalis voluntarily decided to merge with Italian Somalia in that moment. A year later, they regretted it, and this feeling never disappeared. In 1961, they attempted a coup, so did they in 1978. In 1988, they launched a final attack on the government forces, which was ultimately successful. In 1968, Siad Barre became the leader of Somalia. In 1977, they attacked Ethiopia to gain control over the Ogaden region, which is inhabited by ethnic Somalis. Ethiopian army won, but the war wasn't closed with a peace deal. Separatist movements were used to continue the war in this guise. Ethiopia had its own struggle with separatists in the Ogaden and in Eritrea. Somalia also had its own struggle with rebels in the former British parts. These rebels formed the Somali National Movement. Both Ethiopia and Somalia armed the separatists to weaken each other. But this equilibrium changed in 1988. In 1988, Eritrean rebels measured a painful defeat on the Ethiopian army. Because of this, Ethiopia decided to accept the peace deal offered by Siad Barre, so they can focus with all force on Eritrea. The peace deal was a trade-off. Ethiopia stopped supporting the SNM. In return, Somalia gave up its claim on the Ogaden. As the SNM had to leave their hideaways in Ethiopia, they used their last stockpiles and launched a nothing-to-lose full-scale attack to seize northwest Somalia. They seized all the major cities. This is just where the madness started. Siad Barre responded with all his wrath. Artillery shelling of Hargeisa and Buro started and was accompanied by large-scale aerial bombing of the city. Up to 90% of the city was destroyed. Some 50,000 people believed to have lost their lives, while the remaining 500,000 inhabitants fled. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. The government soldiers, upon entering the cities, went on a rampage. This included dragging men out of their houses and shooting them at point-blank range and summary killing of civilians. Although Barre's forces recaptured Hargeisa and Buro, in the next year they gradually lost control over today's Somaliland. The main reason was that his cruelty caused resentment within his forces too. Soldiers began to desert. Meanwhile, in the south, sensing that the regime was weakening, the Hawiye clan started to organize its own dissident movement, the United Somali Congress. In 1990, the Ogaden, fearing that they might go down with the regime, also decided to create their own opposition front, the Somali Patriotic Movement. Other clans followed their example. By 1991, all over Somalia, almost each Somali clan formed their own military group in order to protect their tribes. But in most wars, the belligerents run out of resources and they return to the white table. A new status quo forms and the region starts to heal. Why not in this case? Resentment alone doesn't buy bullets. To understand how this local fire turned into a national inferno, we have to follow the money. How can a poor country afford a decade-long civil war? This arms issue really bugged me, as I knew Somalia wasn't an economic powerhouse. The country's main income is selling cattle to Arabia since the beginning of time. We can't underestimate the volume of this trade, but this itself won't help the Somali teenagers equip themselves with state-of-the-art weapons and infinite ammunition. So who paid the bill? We already know one donor. Ethiopia aided the SNM. Ethiopia is rich in resources, but let's be clear, Ethiopia was aided by the Soviet Union. This very fact motivated Somalia's dictator, Siad Barre, to seek for international donors. As the war with Ethiopia was graded down to a war of separatist groups, the United States showed interest. In 1980, they made a pact with Siad Barre, renting the Berbera naval base for roughly 100 million per year. Seeing the bloody massacre in Somaliland, the United States cancelled the Berbera deal in 1988. They didn't need the base anyway, as the collapse of the Soviet Union was in a foreseeable future. Needless to say, this nullified Siad Barre's power. As Ethiopia didn't stop supporting Somali separatists, things between the Somalian government and its opposition started to even out. In the unfolding unipolar world of the 90s, Siad Barre had nowhere to turn. Somalian diaspora in Great Britain aided Somaliland. Somalian diaspora in Italy aided various Somalian groups. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi backed the SSDF, Barre's inside opposition. Power struggle is typically a short period, but the influx of aid made civil war the new norm for over a decade. But this doesn't explain why did Somalis tolerate the inner war. They share the same language, same religion, same culture, and they already experienced national unity in the 1960s and 70s. So why did nobody step up and defend the state? Why was everybody just watching how the state falls apart? The international intervention will succeed very quickly because we are faced here only with young teenagers with machine guns who are just going to run away. These were the words of Bernard Kouchner, French Secretary of State for Humanitarian Affairs in 1992. In this year, the United Nations decided to intervene and stop the bloodshed in Somalia. The same year, the United States also launched its own mission. Their intelligence about Somalia was so limited that they actually thought that the only issue here is the young population having guns. They thought the solution is simple police work. Nobody asked the former colonizers, nobody asked Somali scholars. It actually scared me to learn how unprepared were both the United States and the United Nations. And this delayed the peace with many years. First of all, after the disastrous Ogaden War, Siad Barre started to rely on 3 clans only. Since the coup attempt of the Majartan clan in 1978, Siad Barre only trusted his own clan and 2 others. These were the Marehan, Ogaden and Dulbahante clans. This wasn't an official policy, just a cold reality. Obviously this grew resentment against the 3 clans, but in the long run it raised another question. Is Somalia owned by the Somalis or the MOD? Did the other clans become subverted? And the answer is yes. So the opposition openly turned weapons against the government. In other words, the clans revolted. Each opposition organization secured their own territory. When fighting the Somalian army, nobody thought that they are fighting the nation's army. They saw it as Siad Barre's private security group. Just like the army, all other national bodies, institutes and services failed to serve the whole nation. Siad Barre's wrath against the other clans and distrust to other clans dismantled the faith in the government bodies. Not to mention that there was not a single state service that was functional. Even simple things like a unified, efficient nationwide postal service were missing, let alone healthcare or school system. So, by 1992, when the US and United Nations peace missions arrived, Somalia only existed on paper, but these missions ignored this fact. And nowhere was this ignorance more dangerous than in the hands of the organizations sent to help them. I dare to say that the peace missions were the biggest obstacle to bring peace to Somalia, the United Nations. Leave a comment, but also let me explain. The UN intervention in Somalia got the name UNISOM. UNISOM 1 started in 1992 and ended in 1993. It was a toothless lion, so when they tried to enforce a general ceasefire, no one really listened to them. Also, when they tried to negotiate a ceasefire, they made a strategic mistake. UN diplomats treated military leaders of the various Somali factions as politicians. This was problematic for 2 reasons. First of all, The Somali society was mostly a nomadic society. There are roles in that society, but the roles were stronger than the person carrying the role. So, if a warlord agreed on something the clansmen didn't want, somebody else stepped into the role. The other problem with the negotiations with warlords was that Somalian society saw them as war criminals. They didn't represent the people, they just had might buy weapons. Sitting down in conference rooms with war criminals decreased the public support of the UN mission even more. In less than a year, the UN Secretary General decided to stop the UN mission. Americans organized Operation Restore Hope instead. This was an even bigger failure, so the US withdrew as well. Meanwhile, UNISOM 2 was launched. This time, the approach was more warlike, but ultimately this turned the UN mission into another fighting clan. In 1993, practically clans drove a war against the UN mission, which was simply called the UN War. I won't tell the whole story, you might want to hear about the Black Hawk incident, but I was more interested in the system failure. So I kept reading articles and I found the last missing piece of the puzzle. The United Nations imposed an arms embargo on Somalia. This was impossible to enforce, but there was an even bigger issue. Some peacekeeping units were corrupt and sold a significant amount of weapons to the clans, but official UN practices were also misused. Most of the food and financial aid ended up in the hands of the warlords, fueling their wars. In 1995, the UN mission ended. Up until 2007, there were no official foreign peacekeepers in Somalia. Everyone expected a total collapse, but nothing really happened. Nothing as in nothing. There was silence for the first time in years. The clans ran out of aid. They had to tune down their military operations. Exhaustion was the actual peacemaker. It doesn't mean Somalia suddenly unified. The rule of clans became the new norm, and Somalia, as a country, existed only in political discussions. Somali politics did not operate anymore as a contest for national political control, rather as a contest for local political and economic influence. The clan territories became semi-independent states, and the acknowledgement of these de facto units looks like the foundation of future Somalia. I'm from Europe, so it might sound harsh coming from me, but the Somalian national identity wasn't real in the 1990s. Reading about the clans, the whole story reminded me of early medieval Europe. If you take Irish history as an example, despite a homogenous culture, Ireland was a bunch of fighting clans until the 12th century. The formation of Irish identity was achieved by centuries. Likewise, Somalis need time to see beyond clan divisions and see themselves as Somalis instead of Isak, Darod, Majerten and the others. This actually raises an uncomfortable question about national identity. Does it exist for real? Or is it something we learn in school and treat it as a fact? What do you think? As of Somalia, the country's history didn't stop, and there is a lot to tell about what happened in 2007, how Turkey started a successful operation there, or how Somalia is forming its future in the present days. My next video, however, will be a throwback into the 15th century to investigate a religious terror state that somehow Somalis still can be proud of. My name is Istvan, I studied history, geography and global history, and thank you for watching.